It was a cloudy morning, the kind that made everything look a little gray and tired. The hospital lobby was already crowded with patients waiting in lines, the echo of footsteps filling the hallway, and the faint smell of disinfectant hanging in the air. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. Doctors discussed cases in hushed tones, and the receptionist's phone kept ringing without a single pause. It was just another busy day, or so everyone thought. At the front desk of the emergency department, Nurse Carla was having one of those long, exhausting mornings. She had been on her feet since 6 a.m., barely managing to sip her coffee between admitting new patients and answering calls. Her patience was wearing thin, and the stress was visible in the way she sighed every few minutes and kept glancing at the clock, hoping for her break. Around 10 in the morning, a woman walked through the glass doors. She looked tired, not just physically but deeply, as if she carried a weight on her shoulders that no one could see. Her clothes were plain, a bit worn at the edges, and she clutched a small brown purse close to her chest. Her hair was tied loosely, and there was something humble about her presence. She didn't look like someone important, and that's exactly what caused the misunderstanding. She stood at the counter and waited quietly, hoping to get someone's attention. Carla noticed her from the corner of her eye but didn't bother looking up immediately. "Yes?" she finally said without much interest, still typing something into the computer. The woman smiled softly, trying to be polite. "Good morning," she said in a gentle voice. "I'd like to speak with the attending physician, please." Carla frowned, still not looking at her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," the woman said, shaking her head. "But it's quite important. I just need a few minutes." That was the wrong thing to say on a day like this. The nurse immediately assumed she was one of those walk-ins who showed up for random questions. Or worse, someone asking for help without proper reason. Her tone became sharper. "Ma'am, we don't have time for people just walking in without a reason. If it's not an emergency, you'll need to book an appointment at reception." The woman hesitated, her smile fading a little. "I understand you're busy," she said softly, "but I really need to—" Before she could finish, Carla interrupted, her voice firm now. "Ma'am, please, I told you, this is the emergency department. If you don't have an emergency or paperwork, I can't let you in. There are patients waiting who actually need treatment." For a second, the woman looked around. People were watching. Some were coughing, some sitting in wheelchairs. She didn't want to cause a scene. She lowered her voice even more. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I only wanted to—" Carla stood up from her chair, her tone turning colder. "Please don't make this difficult. You can't just walk into the ER and ask for doctors like that. If you have no appointment, you'll have to leave." The woman's face fell. Her eyes darted down to the floor, and she gripped her purse tighter. There was no anger in her, only quiet disappointment. She looked like someone who didn't want to argue, someone used to being misunderstood. For a moment, she seemed like she might say something, maybe explain who she really was, but instead she just nodded. "I'm sorry for the trouble," she said in a calm voice. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Carla didn't respond. She simply sat back down and returned to her computer. The woman turned and began walking toward the door slowly, her footsteps soft and hesitant. A security guard by the entrance opened the door for her, thinking she was just another visitor leaving early. As she stepped outside, the wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. She stopped for a second, looking back at the hospital building with a quiet, unreadable expression, a mix of sadness and reflection. Then she walked away. Inside, Carla sighed again. "People just show up for no reason," she muttered under her breath. Another nurse nearby gave a small laugh. "You handled that well," she said jokingly. "You don't have patience for nonsense today." Carla shrugged. "It's not nonsense. You know how many people come here just to ask silly questions? Some even pretend to be in pain just to get faster service. I'm done wasting time." She didn't mean to sound cruel. She was tired, overwhelmed, and had probably dealt with a dozen rude or impatient patients that morning. But she never stopped to think on what if that woman had a reason? What if she wasn't just anyone? A few minutes later, the receptionist came over holding a clipboard. "Hey Carla, did you talk to a woman earlier?" Kinda quiet, around her 50s, wearing a gray coat. Carla raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, why?" She asked for the attending physician. "Yes, why?" The receptionist shrugged. "I think she might have been someone important. She didn't give her name, but she asked some questions about patient care policies before you sent her away." Carla rolled her eyes. Oh, great. Probably another inspector or someone pretending to be one. I don't have time for that. The receptionist looked uncertain. She seemed polite, though. Not like the usual complaints we get. Trust me, Carla said, turning back to her screen. If she were really important, she wouldn't come here dressed like that. She didn't notice how harsh that sounded. She didn't even think about it again. To her, it was just one of many small incidents in a long, tiring day. But outside the hospital, the woman sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine. She looked through the windshield at the building, her eyes calm but thoughtful. She had seen everything she needed to see. How staff behaved when they thought no one was watching, how kindness could disappear under pressure, and how judgment could cloud even the best professionals. She took a deep breath and drove away, her mind already made up about what she would do next time she returned. Back inside, Carla was already attending to another patient. Her tone was more patient now because this person had visible symptoms and clear documents, someone she could legitimately help. She felt a small sense of control again, unaware that her earlier actions had been witnessed by someone who held more authority than she could imagine. Hours went by, and the day continued like any other. Nurses rushed from room to room, doctors made rounds, and patients filled the corridors. But a quiet storm was already forming, a change none of them saw coming. The woman who had been turned away wasn't just any visitor. She had come that morning with a purpose. She wanted to see the hospital from a patient's point of view, to understand how staff treated people who didn't look powerful or wealthy. She wanted to see the truth behind the polite smiles and professional uniforms. And what she found was exactly what she feared. Arrogance hidden behind exhaustion and compassion slowly being replaced by habit. As she drove home, her phone rang. It was one of the senior administrators of the hospital, checking if she'd arrived safely for her unannounced review. The woman smiled faintly and said, "Yes, I made it there earlier." "I saw everything I needed to." "Everything?" the administrator asked, surprised. "You weren't supposed to announce yourself until tomorrow." "I didn't," she replied softly. That was the point. When the call ended, she looked out the car window, the city lights passing by one. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even hurt. She just felt sad. Sad that people could forget what their job was truly about. She had worked in healthcare her entire life. She knew how hard the job was, how draining it could be, but she also believed kindness was the one thing that shouldn't ever run out. She thought of the nurse who had turned her away. The sharp tone, the impatience, the lack of eye contact. She knew it came from fatigue, not cruelty, but still it mattered. The way staff treated people when they thought no one important was watching said everything about the culture inside those walls. And that culture, she decided, needed to change. Back at the hospital, Carla finally got her break. She sat in the cafeteria scrolling through her phone, not giving a single thought to the woman from earlier. To her it was over. Just another random visitor. She had no idea that the same woman would soon return, not as a visitor, not as a patient, but as the new hospital director. And when that day came, everything about that morning, every word, every look, every assumption would come back to her in ways she never imagined. For now, the hospital buzzed on, unaware of the quiet reckoning that was already on its way. The next morning started out like any other day at the hospital. The sun was already up, shining through the large glass doors, and the smell of coffee filled the break room as staff hurried in and out before their shifts. The hospital never truly rested. It just slowed down for a few hours at night and then woke up all over again. Carla came in 10 minutes early, which was rare for her. She felt slightly guilty about how she had treated that woman yesterday, but only for a moment. She told herself it wasn't really her fault. She had been stressed, tired, and doing her best. Everyone had bad days, right? Still, a small part of her kept replaying that scene in her head. The woman's soft voice, the way she didn't argue, the sadness in her eyes as she left. Carla brushed it off, shaking her head as she hung her bag in the locker. "I can't think about that today," she muttered to herself. "I've got enough work waiting." By the time she walked to her station, the waiting room was already filling up. A child crying in one corner, an elderly man asking for directions, a worried mother talking to the receptionist. It was just another busy morning, and Carla went right back into routine, checking forms, calling patients, keeping the line moving. About an hour later, a nurse from another department rushed in, her face full of excitement. "Did you hear the news?" she asked loudly. Carla looked up. "What news?" "The new hospital director. She's arriving today," the nurse said, almost whispering the last word as if it were a secret. Everyone in the room turned their heads. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Carla frowned. "Wait, I thought that was next week." "No," the nurse said, shaking her head. "Apparently she moved the schedule up. She's coming in today for an unannounced visit. They say she's already in the city." Carla let out a small sigh. "Great, just what we need. Another inspection?" The nurse smiled nervously. "Yeah, and from what I heard, she's really strict. She's been with big hospitals before. She checks everything. How we treat patients, how we talk to people, even how we keep the records." Someone at the back joked, "Well, I hope she doesn't come to the emergency department. We're a mess most of the time." Laughter broke the tension for a moment, but there was an undertone of anxiety in everyone's voice. A hospital director's visit was no small thing. It meant every little mistake could be noticed. Everyone wanted to look their best, sound their best, and act their best, at least for that day. Carla rolled her eyes a bit. "They all act strict at first," she said. "Then they calm down when they realize we're doing our jobs." But deep down, she didn't like surprises. She liked routine, things she could predict. Someone new meant changes, and she wasn't sure she liked that idea. As the morning went on, word spread quickly through every department. By lunchtime, the entire hospital knew. Doctors were straightening their coats. Janitors were polishing the floors twice. And even the cafeteria staff were rearranging the food display to look more appealing. Carla and her colleagues were told to keep everything spotless and maintain excellent communication with patients. Those were the words the head nurse used during a quick team meeting. "We don't know exactly when she'll come to this floor," she warned. "So be on your best behavior at all times." The nurses nodded, some pretending not to care, others quietly panicking. Carla tried to act calm. "We handle emergencies every day. What's a director visit compared to that?" she said with a small laugh. But when she caught herself looking at her reflection in the glass window and fixing her hair, she knew she wasn't as relaxed as she wanted to sound. By early afternoon, the hospital was buzzing. People whispered in hallways, glancing toward the elevators every time they heard them open. The director could walk in at any moment and nobody wanted to be caught off guard. Around 2 o'clock, Carla sat at her desk entering patient details into the computer when 2 doctors started chatting nearby. "I heard she's very down-to-earth," one of them said. "Down-to-earth? Then why show up unannounced?" the other replied. "That's not exactly casual." Carla listened quietly but didn't join in. She was trying to concentrate, but her mind wandered. For some reason, she couldn't stop picturing the woman from yesterday, the one she'd sent away. There was something strange about the timing. Could that have been... No, it couldn't. That woman was dressed simply, almost too casually. A hospital director wouldn't come looking like that. Still, the thought lingered. At around 3, the hospital administrator made an announcement over the intercom. "Attention all departments. Please make sure your areas are presentable. The new hospital director will begin her informal tour shortly." That was it. Everyone froze for a moment. Carla felt her pulse quicken. She tried to act normal, but she found herself rearranging papers on her desk that were already perfectly stacked. She glanced around to see if her coworkers were nervous too. They were. One of them even straightened the flower vase on the counter, something no one ever cared about before. The receptionist whispered, "I hope she's nice." "Some directors come in and fire people on their first week." Carla laughed nervously. "If she fires anyone, it won't be me. I've been working here for years." But her confidence didn't last long. A few minutes later, one of the senior doctors passed by and said, "The director is already on the first floor. She's walking around with the admin team." Everyone started pretending to work harder. The energy changed instantly, like a sudden gust of wind had passed through. Even the patients could feel it. Nurses smiled more. Voices softened and the atmosphere grew strangely formal. Carla's stomach twisted with a mix of curiosity and unease. She wanted to see what the new director looked like, but she also hoped she wouldn't have to talk to her. "Maybe she'll just check the wards and offices," she said, quietly to the receptionist, or "maybe she'll come here." The receptionist replied with a grin. Carla rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. 15 minutes later, the elevator door opened at the end of the hallway. A small group of people stepped out. The hospital administrator, 2 senior doctors, and 1 woman walking beside them. Carla looked up from her desk. And for a second, everything stopped. The woman was familiar. Very familiar. It took Carla only a moment to realize who she was. The gray coat was gone, replaced by a formal navy suit. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she wore an ID badge that shimmered slightly under the light. It was the same woman she had kicked out yesterday. Carla froze in her chair, her mouth slightly open. She felt her heartbeat in her ears. Her hands went cold and her mind went blank. The woman, now clearly the hospital's new director, looked around the emergency department with calm, observant eyes. Her face didn't show anger or pride, only a quiet strength. She nodded at the staff politely as she walked, stopping occasionally to ask questions about patient care, waiting times, and documentation. When her eyes met Carla's, there was no hostility, just recognition. And that made it even worse. Carla immediately stood up, trying to compose herself. "Good afternoon," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Welcome to our department." The director gave a small nod. "Good afternoon," she replied kindly. "We met yesterday, didn't we?" Her voice was calm but carried weight, the kind of tone that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Carla's face turned red. I didn't realize, the director gently smiled. "It's all right. You didn't know. That's why I came unannounced." The other staff members exchanged confused looks. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could tell something was off. The administrator, who stood beside the director, looked puzzled as well. The director continued walking, speaking to other nurses and patients, but Carla's mind was spinning. She could barely focus on anything else. The embarrassment burned inside her like a fire she couldn't put out. As the group moved further down the corridor, whispers started spreading again. Faster this time. "Did you hear that?" one nurse whispered. "She said she met Carla yesterday." "What does that mean?" Another asked. "I don't know, but Carla looks like she's seen a ghost." Carla pretended not to hear. She just sat there, staring at her computer screen, unable to type a single word. The director stayed in the department for about 20 minutes, observing quietly. She spoke with patients, asked about their experiences, and smiled gently at those waiting long hours. She didn't scold anyone or point out mistakes. But everyone could feel her presence, calm, steady, and deeply aware. Before leaving, she turned back to the staff. "Thank you for your hard work," she said softly. "I know how difficult this job can be. I'll be holding a short meeting later this afternoon. Please attend if you can." With that, she left the room. As soon as she was gone, the silence broke. "What just happened?" someone whispered. "Carla, did you really meet her yesterday?" Carla didn't answer. She felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her coworkers stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but she couldn't speak. After a long pause, she finally said quietly, "She came here yesterday, but I didn't know who she was." The others exchanged looks, and some shocked, some trying not to laugh nervously. "You told her to leave?" one of them asked. Carla nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I thought she was just a random visitor." No one said anything after that. The room felt heavy. As the day went on, Carla kept thinking about every word she'd said to that woman. Every impatient sigh, every cold look, every assumption. It all came back now like a movie she didn't want to watch. She knew she'd made a mistake, and a big one. And soon, the whole hospital would know it too. What she didn't know was that the director wasn't angry. She wasn't the kind of person who sought revenge or humiliation, but she had seen something that needed to be addressed, something deeper than one rude encounter. And later that day, when she gathered everyone for a meeting, she would teach them a lesson none of them would ever forget. For now, though, Carla sat quietly at her desk, waiting for her turn to face the consequences of a moment she wished she could take back. The day felt longer than usual. Every second seemed to stretch into minutes after the new hospital director left the emergency department. The air in the room still carried a strange tension. People spoke in hushed voices, and every sound, a phone ringing, a printer beeping, footsteps down the hallway, felt louder than it should have. Carla sat quietly at her desk, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on the director's face when their eyes met. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was calm and too calm, and somehow that made it worse. She had spent years working in that hospital, seen every kind of patient come and go, and dealt with every kind of problem. But in all her time there, she had never felt this kind of fear. Not the fear of losing her job, but the fear of realizing she had been completely wrong about someone. Her mind kept replaying yesterday's moment like a film that refused to stop. The gray coat, the polite tone, the quiet apology before leaving. All the signs were there, but she had been too tired, too impatient, too sure of herself to notice. Now everyone in the department knew. People didn't say much to her, but their glances said everything. A few felt sorry for her. Others just looked uncomfortable. No one wanted to be in her place. By 4 p.m., a notice came over the intercom. "Attention all staff, please gather in conference room B for a short meeting with the new hospital director at 4:30. That was it. Carla's heart sank. She knew it was coming. The staff slowly began to prepare. Some straightened their uniforms, others whispered nervously in corners, trying to guess what the director would say. "Maybe it's just a welcome speech," one nurse said. "I doubt it," another replied. She didn't look like the kind who talks just for formality. Carla stayed silent. She didn't have the courage to say anything. Her hands were cold and her stomach twisted with guilt. She wanted to disappear, to pretend she was sick, but she knew she couldn't. When the clock hit 4:25, everyone started walking toward the conference room. The hallway was filled with quiet footsteps. No one laughed, no one talked loudly. It felt like the air itself was waiting. Inside the conference room, rows of chairs had been arranged neatly. The staff filled them quickly, their faces a mix of curiosity and worry. The director wasn't there yet. A few people tried to guess what she'd say, but their voices were soft, uncertain. Then, a few minutes later, the door opened. The new director walked in with a calm grace that made everyone sit up a little straighter. She wasn't dressed fancy, just neat and professional. The kind of person who didn't need to try hard to command respect. The administrator and 2 senior doctors followed her, but all eyes were on her. She stood at the front of the room and smiled politely. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said. Her voice was gentle, but it carried easily through the quiet space. "Thank you for taking the time to be here." Everyone murmured a greeting in return. She looked around slowly, making brief eye contact with several faces. When her eyes met Carla's, she gave a small nod, acknowledging her without saying anything yet. "I visited several departments today," she continued, "and I had the opportunity to observe how our hospital operates on a normal day, not just in meetings or reports, but in real interactions." The room was silent. Everyone knew what that meant. "I saw dedicated staff, hardworking nurses, skilled doctors, and people who clearly care about their patients," she said sincerely. "You all deserve credit for that. Running a hospital is not easy. It takes energy, patience, and a lot of compassion." There was a small sense of relief in the room. People relaxed slightly in their seats, but then she paused. Her tone softened and she spoke slower. "However, I also saw moments that reminded me how easy it is to forget why we chose this profession." Her eyes moved gently across the room. "Sometimes we get so busy, so tired, so caught up in the system that we stop seeing people as people. We see them as tasks, forms, cases, or interruptions. And when that happens, even the best hospital loses its heart." The room went completely still. Carla looked down at her hands, her throat tightening. Every word felt like it was directed at her, even though the director never mentioned her name. The director continued. "Yesterday, before my official arrival, I came to this hospital without introducing myself. I wanted to see things from a visitor's point of view, to understand how someone new, someone ordinary, might be treated when they walk through those doors." The administrator shifted uncomfortably. A few people glanced at one another. Carla's heart started pounding so loudly she was sure people around her could hear it. "I wasn't wearing a suit," the director said quietly. "I wasn't carrying an ID badge. I came simply as a woman seeking to speak with the attending physician." There was a murmur in the room. Some staff now realized what had happened. The director looked calm, not angry, just thoughtful. "I was asked to leave," she said softly. "Not because the staff was cruel, but because assumptions were made. The way I looked, the way I spoke, the fact that I didn't have an appointment, that was enough for someone to decide I didn't belong." No one moved. The silence was heavy, almost painful. Carla could feel the heat rise to her face. She wanted to cry but couldn't. She wanted to apologize right there, but her voice wouldn't come out. The director took a breath and continued, "I don't tell you this to embarrass anyone. I tell you this because it's important. Every person who walks into this hospital deserves respect, no matter how they look, how they speak, or whether they have paperwork. We can never forget that behind every request, behind every question is a human being, someone who might be scared, sick, or simply lost." Her words were calm but powerful. They didn't sound like a speech. They sounded like truth. She looked around again and her eyes softened. "I know this job is hard. I've been in your shoes. I've worked long shifts, skipped meals, and gone home too tired to speak. I know how it feels when people are rude or demanding, but we must never let exhaustion turn into arrogance. Kindness doesn't take time, it takes choice." The words sank deep into everyone. Some people nodded. Others looked down, reflecting quietly. Carla felt tears building in her eyes. She wanted to stand up and say something, to admit what she'd done, but she couldn't find the courage. She was terrified of making things worse. The director smiled gently. "From now on," she said, "I want us to rebuild what this hospital stands for. Not just great service, but compassion. I'll be starting an internal program focused on patient dignity and empathy training. It's not a punishment. It's a reminder of who we are." Her voice softened even more. "Because when people remember how to treat others with respect, everything else, the efficiency, the trust, the success, follows naturally." Then she paused, scanning the room once more. Her eyes found Carla again. "And to the person who taught me this lesson yesterday," she said, "thank you. You reminded me that our work is never finished, that even leaders must sometimes see from the ground up to understand what needs to change." Everyone turned slightly, following her gaze. Carla's heart stopped. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. The director didn't name her, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. Carla stood up slowly, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry," she said quietly, tears running down her cheeks. "I didn't know who you were. I was tired and I judged too quickly. I shouldn't have." The room was silent. The director smiled kindly. "It's all right," she said softly. "You don't need to apologize to me. We've all made mistakes. What matters is what we do after them." Carla nodded, still crying, her shoulders shaking. "I'll do better," she whispered. "I know you will," the director replied. There was something in her tone, not anger, not pity, but genuine understanding. It made Carla's tears flow even harder. The meeting ended a few minutes later. People walked out quietly, thinking deeply about what they had just heard. There were no jokes, no gossip, just reflection. The kind that changes people. Carla stayed behind for a moment, wiping her eyes. The director was talking to the administrator near the door. After everyone else left, Carla hesitated, then walked over slowly. "Can I speak with you?" she asked in a shaky voice. The director nodded. "Of course." They stepped aside near the window. The afternoon sun streamed through, lighting up the quiet room. "I wanted to thank you," Carla said, "not just for understanding, but for not embarrassing me in front of everyone." "You could have easily done that," the director smiled gently. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," she said. "I came to remind us all why we're here. You've been working here for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes," Carla nodded. "Almost 10 years. That means you care," the director said. "You wouldn't have lasted this long if you didn't. Yesterday was just one bad moment. Don't let it define you. Learn from it." Carla looked down, then back up. "I will. I promise." The director placed a hand on her shoulder. "Good, because I need people like you to help me make this place better." Carla blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yes, you," the director said. "You've seen the worst of the workload, the pressure, the long nights. You know what it's like on the front lines. That makes your perspective valuable. I want you to help lead the new empathy initiative. Together we'll make sure no one feels the way you made me feel yesterday." Carla's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was gratitude. She nodded, barely able to speak. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't let you down," the director smiled warmly. "I know you won't." When Carla walked out of that room, she felt lighter even though her heart was still fragile. For the first time in a long while, she understood what her job really meant. Not just giving medicine or checking charts, but making people feel seen and respected. That night as she drove home, The streets were quiet, and the sky had turned a soft shade of orange. She rolled down her window and let the wind hit her face, thinking about how quickly life could turn. One moment of impatience had brought her face to face with her biggest mistake and her greatest lesson. The next day, when she stepped into the hospital, she greeted every patient with a genuine smile. Her tone was softer, her eyes kinder. She didn't do it because she was being watched. She did it because she finally understood that compassion wasn't something you saved for special occasions. It was the very heart of her work. And somewhere down the hall, the director noticed. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. She just smiled quietly, knowing change had already begun. The following week, the hospital felt a little different. It wasn't a big change that you could see right away, but there was something softer in the air. The way people greeted each other, the way nurses spoke to patients, even the way the receptionist smiled at visitors. It was as if everyone was quietly trying to do better after that meeting. The new director had already started her plan. She called it the Patient Dignity Initiative. It wasn't just about rules or training sessions. It was about changing hearts, one conversation at a time. On Monday morning, she invited all the department heads to a short meeting. The room wasn't filled with formalities or charts. Instead, she spoke like someone who understood them. She didn't talk about numbers or targets. She talked about people. "I know how busy each of you is," she said, "but I also know that kindness doesn't slow down our work. It makes it easier. People cooperate more when they feel respected. Patients heal faster when they feel seen. We can't cure everyone, but we can treat everyone with dignity." Some listened politely, some nodded, and others just sat quietly. It wasn't that they disagreed. They just weren't used to this kind of talk from someone at the top. Usually, directors talked about budgets and deadlines, not compassion. When the meeting ended, she personally handed each department a short guide she had written herself, not copied from a policy manual, but from her own experience. It was titled, "Every Door is a First Impression." It reminded staff that the hospital's reputation didn't start in the operating room or the offices. It started at the front desk, the hallway, the waiting chairs, the places where people felt nervous, scared, and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Carla was doing her best to live up to the trust the director had placed in her. She still couldn't believe she had been asked to help lead the initiative. At first, she thought people would judge her for it, but to her surprise, they didn't. In fact, some even came to her for advice. One afternoon, a young nurse approached her at the nurses' station. "Hey, I heard you're helping with that new project. What's it like?" Carla smiled gently. "It's not a project," she said. "It's more like a reminder to listen before we speak, to look people in the eye when they talk to us, to treat them like they matter." The young nurse nodded. "That makes sense," she said. "Sometimes I get so caught up in the tasks I forget the person." Carla understood. We all do. But we can fix it. One patient at a time, she meant it. Every day after that, she made small changes. She stopped for an extra minute to comfort worried families. She spoke gently to frustrated patients. She even began checking on her colleagues, asking if they had eaten, if they were okay. Slowly, her attitude spread to others. One morning, while she was helping an elderly man who was having trouble filling out his form, the receptionist smiled and said quietly, "You've changed a lot. You know?" Carla looked up, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," the receptionist said. "You're calmer, kinder, it's nice." Everyone noticed. Carla didn't know what to say. She just smiled. Deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Meanwhile, the director made regular rounds through the hospital, not as a boss, but as a listener. She talked to patients in waiting rooms, asked cleaners how their day was going, and thanked nurses for their hard work. At first, people were nervous around her, but soon, they began to realize she wasn't looking for mistakes. She was looking for moments of kindness. One afternoon, she visited the pediatric ward. A little girl was sitting on the bed, crying softly because she missed her mother. A nurse stood nearby, unsure of how to calm her down. The director walked over, knelt beside the bed, and spoke to the girl in a gentle voice. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked. "I want to go home," the girl whispered. The director smiled softly. "I know, but you're being very brave. Can I tell you a secret? Every brave person feels scared sometimes. That's what makes them strong." The little girl sniffled, looking up at her. "Really?" "Really." the director said. "You're helping everyone here by being strong. We're all proud of you." The girl smiled weakly, wiping her tears. The nurse standing beside them watched quietly, her eyes watering. She later told Carla, "I've never seen a director talk to a child like that. It's different." Carla nodded. "That's why she's here. To remind us that patients aren't just cases and they're people." The more time passed, the more people started to believe it. The staff began greeting patients with genuine warmth. The doctors started explaining things more patiently. Even the janitors and guards learned to offer small gestures of comfort, a kind word, a simple smile. But the biggest change happened inside Carla herself. She began to see her old self from the outside. The tired, short-tempered nurse who used to think being strict meant being efficient. Now she understood that efficiency without empathy was hollow. One evening after her shift, she stayed back to organize files. The hallway was quiet, and the lights had dimmed to their night mode. As she worked, she saw the director walking by. "You're still here?" the director asked with a kind smile. Carla nodded. "Just finishing up. I like to make sure everything's ready for the next shift." The director walked closer. "You've been doing a wonderful job," she said. "The atmosphere here has changed." "People notice it," Carla smiled shyly. "Thank you. It's not just me. Everyone's trying." "Yes," the director agreed, "because they're following your example." Carla's eyes widened. "My example?" "Yes," the director said softly. "You showed them that change starts with admitting we were wrong. That takes courage." Carla didn't know what to say. She looked down for a moment, then said quietly, "It still hurts when I think about that day. I wish I could take it back." The director smiled kindly. "You don't need to. That day made this one possible. Sometimes mistakes are just lessons in disguise." Carla nodded slowly. "I guess so." The director placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've turned something painful into something beautiful. That's what real growth looks like." After the director left, Carla stood there for a while, letting those words sink in. She felt tears in her eyes, not of guilt this time, but of gratitude. The next few weeks proved that kindness truly was contagious. Complaints from patients dropped, morale among staff improved, and even the hospital's reputation began to rise. The board of trustees noticed the difference and praised the director's leadership, but she always gave credit to the staff. "This change," she said in one of the meetings, "didn't come from policy. It came from people. It came from hearts that decided to care again." One particular moment stood out that month. A homeless man came into the emergency room one cold night asking for help. He didn't have insurance or proper clothes. A few months ago, he might have been treated as a problem, but not anymore. Carla saw him shivering near the entrance and immediately walked over. She gave him a warm blanket, guided him to a chair, and got him water. When he apologized for causing trouble, she smiled and said, "You're not trouble. You're a person who needs help. That's what we're here for." The man looked up with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Later, when the director heard about it, she smiled quietly. She didn't make a big announcement or give an award. She just stopped by the next day and said to Carla, "I heard about last night. You made the hospital proud." Carla's eyes softened. "I just did what anyone should do." "Exactly," the director said. "That's the point." Soon the hospital became known for something rare, genuine care. Patients started telling stories about how kind the staff were. Some even wrote letters to thank them. The community began to trust the hospital again, not just for its treatment, but for its humanity. Inside the hospital, people started to laugh again, to share food, to help each other during long shifts. It wasn't perfect. There were still stressful days, still tough patients, still endless paperwork. But something deeper had changed. One afternoon, a journalist came to do a feature on the hospital's turnaround. The director gave an interview but asked to include Carla and some of the nurses as well. During the interview, the journalist asked Carla, "What inspired this change?" Carla paused for a moment, thinking. Then she smiled softly and said, "A mistake. I made a mistake that showed me how easily we can forget the human side of what we do, and someone gave me a second chance to make it right." The journalist looked touched. "That's powerful," he said. "It's true," Carla replied. "Sometimes one bad day can teach you more than 100 good ones." When the article came out, it praised the director's leadership and highlighted Carla's transformation. People across the city read it, and soon other hospitals began reaching out asking for advice on how to create similar programs. The director always gave the same answer: start with empathy. Everything else will follow. Months passed, and the Patient Dignity Initiative became a permanent part of hospital training. New nurses were taught that healing started not with medicine, but with respect. Posters around the building read simple messages like, "Listen first," and "Every person matters." Sometimes Carla would walk by those posters and smile. She still had hard days. Days when patients shouted or emergencies piled up, but she never went back to her old ways. Every time she felt tired or impatient, she remembered the woman in the gray coat and how that single moment had changed her life. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital windows, she stood in the hallway watching the director talk to a group of new interns. She smiled to herself, realizing how far they had come, from a place of frustration to a place of compassion. The director caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small, knowing nod. It was the kind of nod that said, "We did it." Carla nodded back, her heart full. She didn't need a title or an award. The quiet change she saw every day was enough. The hospital had found its heart again. And so had she. Weeks turned into months, and the hospital continued to shine in quiet, meaningful ways. It wasn't about awards or recognition anymore. It was about the way people treated one another, with patience, understanding, and respect. Everyone could feel it. The building that once felt cold and mechanical now seemed warm, almost alive. Patients noticed first. They said the place felt different, not just because of the cleanliness or new rules, but because of the people. When they walked in, someone smiled. When they spoke, someone listened. When they were scared, someone stayed beside them, not out of duty, but out of care. Carla had changed the most. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a quiet example of growth and second chances. She never forgot that morning months ago when she had told the woman to leave, the same woman who later turned out to be the hospital's director. The memory still made her heart ache, but it also reminded her of how far she had come. Every morning before her shift, she would stop by the mirror in the locker room. She would look at her reflection, tie her hair neatly, and whisper to herself, "Be kind today." It became her little ritual, her promise to the people she would meet that day. The director, too, kept a close eye on how things were going. She believed real change wasn't shown in reports. It was seen in actions. Sometimes she would walk quietly through the halls just to watch how her staff interacted. She would see Carla helping a patient or a nurse comforting a crying mother, or a cleaner pausing to help an elderly visitor find the right room. Each small act reminded her that the hospital's heart was beating stronger than ever. One afternoon, the director decided to hold a small gathering in the hospital's main hall. It wasn't an official ceremony, just a moment to reflect. She sent out an email inviting all staff, and when the day came, people filled the room. There were nurses in scrubs, doctors still in their coats, receptionists, janitors, and even a few patients who were well enough to join. When everyone settled down, the director stood in front of them with a calm smile. "I wanted to take a few minutes to thank all of you," she began. "When I first came here, I saw a hospital that worked hard, but I also saw people who were tired, who had forgotten why they started this work in the first place. Now I see something very different. I see kindness. I see respect. I see humanity." The crowd listened quietly, moved by her words. She continued, "Change doesn't come from one rule or one person. It comes from all of us deciding to care again, to treat every patient and each other like family. And I want to thank someone who reminded us what that truly means." The director turned toward Carla, who sat near the front, surprised. "This person taught us that even a mistake can lead to something beautiful," the director said, "because she chose to learn from it instead of running from it. She showed courage, honesty, and a heart full of compassion." Carla's eyes filled with tears as everyone turned toward her, clapping warmly. She stood there frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. She never liked being the center of attention, but this felt different. This was a moment of healing, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever stumbled and found the strength to rise again. After the applause faded, the director walked over to her. "Would you like to say something?" she asked gently. Carla hesitated, her heart racing, but then she nodded. She stepped forward, holding the microphone nervously. "I don't know what to say," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I made a mistake, a big one. I judged someone I didn't know. I let my stress and assumptions get the better of me, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. For a long time, I couldn't forgive myself for that." The room was silent. Everyone listened closely. "But then," she continued, "that same person, the one I treated unfairly, gave me a second chance. She didn't yell. She didn't punish me. She showed me that people can change if they're willing to try. That kindness isn't a weakness. It's the strongest thing we have." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Since that day, I've tried to live differently. I've tried to treat everyone like they matter, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what they can afford. Because we never know who we're really talking to, or what they're going through." Her voice softened. "Every patient who walks through our doors deserves care, not judgment. And if I can be a small part of that change, then maybe my mistake wasn't the end. It was the beginning." When she finished, the room erupted in gentle applause. Some people wiped away tears. Others smiled proudly. Even a few doctors who rarely showed emotion nodded with quiet respect. The director stepped forward and gave her a warm hug. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. After the gathering, people approached Carla to thank her. Some shared their own stories, times they had been impatient or unfair, times they wished they had done better. Carla listened to them all, realizing that her story had become something bigger than her. It had become a lesson in grace and forgiveness. From that day on, the Patient Dignity Initiative wasn't just a hospital program. It became part of the hospital's identity. The phrase, "Every person matters," was printed on staff ID cards, posters, and even stitched into the new uniforms. It was more than a slogan. It was a promise. Months later, the hospital received a visit from a health committee that rated hospitals across the region. They were impressed not only with the cleanliness and efficiency, but with the warmth of the staff. One committee member said, "There's something different here and something you can't measure on paper." The director smiled and replied, "That's called compassion." They gave the hospital one of the highest ratings it had ever received, and word spread quickly. Other hospitals sent representatives to learn how they had created such a positive environment. The director shared everything openly. The meetings, the training, the stories, but she always made sure to mention the day that started it all. "Change began," she would say, "when someone learned the power of humility and the gift of forgiveness." Carla continued to work at the hospital, but her role grew over time. She began training new nurses, teaching them not just about procedures and schedules, but about empathy. She would tell them, "Your hands may give treatment, but it's your heart that gives healing." The young nurses loved her for it. They said she spoke like someone who truly understood the work. One morning, a new trainee made a mistake with a patient's chart and came to Carla in tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, shaking. "I messed up." Carla smiled softly. "It's okay. I've made mistakes too. Worse ones. What matters is that you care enough to fix it." The trainee looked up, surprised. "You're not angry?" "No," Carla said gently. "Anger doesn't teach anyone. Understanding does." That simple exchange reminded Carla of her own turning point. The director had once said those same words to her, and now she was passing them on. It was a circle of growth, a quiet ripple of kindness spreading through every person she met. As years went by, Carla became known not only as a skilled nurse, but as someone everyone respected deeply. People said, "If you're having a hard day, talk to her. She'll make you feel better." She didn't need awards or titles. Her reward was seeing patients smile and colleagues work together in harmony. One evening, long after her shift had ended, she walked through the quiet halls of the hospital. The lights were soft and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. She passed by the waiting area, the same one where she had once told the woman in the gray coat to leave. She stopped and looked at the chair where it had happened. For a moment she saw it clearly in her mind, the tired woman, the harsh words, the regret that followed. But instead of pain, she felt peace. Because that single mistake had led to everything she had now, understanding, purpose, and a sense of belonging she'd never known before. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "Thank you." At that very moment, the director appeared at the end of the hallway. She was about to leave for the night but noticed Carla standing there. She walked over with a warm expression. "Still working late?" the director asked. Carla turned to her and smiled. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how much has changed," Carla said. "Not just the hospital, me too." The director nodded gently. "It's beautiful, isn't it? How one small moment can change so many lives." "Yes," Carla said quietly. "It's like planting a seed. You don't see it grow right away, but one day you realize it's become a tree." The director smiled. "And you helped it grow." They stood there for a moment,